She looked me straight in the eyes and said, "This isn't your home. You're just a guest here." That moment burned into my memory. I'd lived there for 6 years, paid the bills, fixed the roof, even patched the damn walls when the rain got in. I'd been more family to that house than she ever was. But all it took was one dinner party, one smug comment in front of her fancy friends, and suddenly I was a freeloader. So I didn't yell, I didn't cry, I just packed up my things and left. 3 weeks later, I bought the entire house in cash. At the foreclosure auction, she didn't even know was happening. You ever get slapped so hard with words, paying, you forget how to breathe? That's what it felt like. She clinked her glass with James, smiled that smug little smile she always saved for special occasions, and turned toward her guests. "Oh, Emily, she's just staying with me for a bit. More like, a guest." The air left the room. Everyone chuckled politely, unsure of the tension that had just sliced through the candles and wine. But me, I sat there, frozen, like I'd just been erased from my own life. A guest. 6 years of memories gone with a single word. 6 years of rent-free labor. 6 years of fixing what she broke, painting what she neglected, organizing what she let fall into chaos. I swallowed my pride with my red wine, but it burned more than it soothed. It didn't always used to be like this. I moved into Karen's house during the lowest point of my life. I was 28, 2 months out from losing both of my parents in a freak car accident. Their old truck had spun out on black ice just outside Bend, Oregon. No warning, no goodbye, just 2 funerals and a crushing wave of silence. I left LA in a daze and headed north to Portland, where Karen lived. She was my cousin, my mother's niece, and the only living relative who didn't need Google Maps to find my name. She welcomed me with open arms and said, "Stay as long as you need." Back then, I believed her. The house was a charming craftsman tucked in the northeast corner of Portland. Old wood floors that creaked like whispers, wide windows that soaked the mornings in honey-colored light. It had history roots, like it had been waiting for someone to love it again. I made it a home. I didn't just crash on her couch. I offered to pay utilities. I scrubbed the grout in her bathroom tile. I took her dog, Millie, on walks every morning. When her roof leaked that winter, I climbed up myself and patched it with help from a neighbor. When the fence collapsed in a storm, I rebuilt it plank by plank. Karen never asked me to, but I needed purpose, and that house gave it to me. At first, we were a team. We'd cook pasta on Tuesdays, binge old rom-coms, gossip about our failed relationships, but the cracks started when she got divorced. Her laughter dimmed, her eyes sharpened. She turned inward, and slowly, I became less of a roommate and more of a reminder of her ex, of failure, of something she couldn't quite control. Then came James. He was slick in that polished shoes and perfect hair kind of way. A finance bro with a silver tongue and teeth too white to be real. He looked at me like I was clutter, the kind of man who measured respect in square footage. He moved in gradually, first his gym bag, then his laptop on the kitchen counter. Then he was making coffee in my French press like he owned the damn place. And Karen let him, worse, she let him decide how she saw me. One day I came home early and found them whispering in the living room. When they noticed me, James laughed and said, "Didn't know the tenant was back." Karen just smiled. I didn't say anything. I never did. I told myself, be quiet, be useful, don't stir trouble. Until that dinner, 12 people at the table, half of them James's friends, all of them sipping their organic wine and swapping stories about investments, Teslas, and ski trips. I had spent the entire day preparing, cleaned the kitchen top to bottom, prepped the salmon, chopped vegetables, even polished the silverware. I wanted everything to feel perfect. But I didn't expect to be erased. Not like that. When she called me a guest, something in me cracked. I barely touched my food. That night, I lay in bed, the same bed I'd bought with my own money. Under a roof, I had repaired myself staring at the ceiling. Had I ever signed anything a lease, a sublet? No. Had I ever seen the title of the house? No. She'd always waved off my suggestions. "We're family," she'd say. "No need for paperwork." But now I knew better. The next morning, I brewed coffee like usual. Karen walked in, already dressed for brunch, casual, confident. I asked her plainly, "Do you see this house as yours?" She blinked, then smiled like I was a confused child. "Of course," she said. "It's in my name. That's all that matters." I nodded, walked to my room, and began packing. Not everything, just enough to disappear without a fight. She thought I was walking away, that she had won. But in truth, I was already building a plan. Because what Karen didn't know was that I had started noticing mail from the bank. Letters she tossed, unopened. I had questions. And soon I would have answers. Real ones, legal ones. Because sometimes revenge doesn't come in anger. It comes in silence. And paperwork? The morning I left Karen's house, it was raining. Not a downpour, just that soft Portland drizzle that sneaks into your clothes and lingers. I didn't slam any doors, didn't raise my voice. I simply zipped my duffel, tossed my design portfolio under my arm, and left behind the place I had once called home. She didn't even come downstairs to say goodbye. I moved into a tiny sublet across town, a converted garage with drafty walls, a squeaky floor, and a window view of someone's trash bins. But it was mine. It smelled like paint thinner and independence. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I remembered the unopened letters, the second mortgage she never mentioned, the strange phone calls she'd step outside to take. Something was wrong with the house, and I was going to find out exactly what. I spent the next week digging through every public property record I could access. I learned the house had been refinanced twice, once after her divorce, and again just 8 months ago. Both times, the equity was sucked out like marrow from bone. But here was the twist: she had defaulted on the second loan. The bank had quietly filed a notice of default. That gave her 90 days before foreclosure proceedings would begin. 62 of those days had already passed. I stared at the filing, my heart pounding in my ears. She was drowning, and she had no idea I knew. Karen's pride wouldn't let her admit the truth, and James, he probably didn't know either. He wouldn't have stuck around if he had. But I knew, and knowledge is leverage. I called an old client, Morgan Reeves, a real estate lawyer with a no-nonsense attitude and a love for revenge stories. She picked up on the second ring. "Emily Dawson," she said, her voice bright. "To what do I owe the pleasure?" "I need to buy a house," I said. A pause. "And let me guess, not through the regular channels." I smiled for the first time in days. "Can you help me stay anonymous?" Morgan chuckled. "Oh, sweetheart, I can make it look like a ghost bought it." We got to work. Every detail was handled quietly. The LLC we registered was named Larklight Holdings, something vague enough to sound boring. We opened a separate bank account, pre-qualified for auction rules. Everything above board but veiled. In the meantime, I shadowed Karen's social media like a hawk. She had no idea what was coming. Still hosting brunches, still posting her flat whites and overpriced candles, still pretending the world was perfectly under control. But foreclosure doesn't care about Instagram. With 3 weeks left before the auction, I paid a visit to the courthouse to confirm the notice. It was real. The house was scheduled for a trustee's sale in 21 days. I remember standing outside that building, phone in hand, rain dripping from my hood, staring at the sky like it owed me something. No, it didn't owe me. I was about to take it myself. I worked harder that month than I ever had. Picked up 3 freelance jobs, barely slept. Every spare dollar went into the war chest. Morgan kept everything airtight. We set a bidding cap just above the estimated value. Cash ready, no loans, no hesitation. I knew Karen would try to stop it, but I also knew she wouldn't see me coming. The night before the auction, I dreamed I was back in that house. Except this time, I wasn't in the guest room. I was standing in the doorway, keys in my hand, and Karen was on the sidewalk watching from the curb like a stranger. I woke up calm, resolved. The auction was held in a conference room at a downtown law firm. There were maybe a dozen people there, all quietly eyeing one another. Karen showed up 10 minutes late. She looked tired, not in the way you look after a bad night's sleep, but the kind of tired that wraps itself around your bones. James wasn't with her. She scanned the room nervously, clutched her bag like it might hold the deed itself. She had no idea. I sat in the back, wearing black slacks, a loose sweater, hair pinned up, invisible. Morgan's associate, our bidder, checked in for Larklight Holdings and took a seat near the front. When the auction began, the opening bid was low, expected. 2 others jumped in, hoping for a quick flip. Karen's lips pressed thin. She whispered urgently to a man beside her, probably some kind of real estate advisor. The number climbed, higher. Then came our bid. Firm, final. The room quieted. No one moved. Karen stepped forward, started to raise her hand, then paused, looked at the advisor. He shook his head. She sat back down. The gavel dropped. Sold to Larklight Holdings. I didn't breathe. Not until I saw the look on her face. She was crushed, hollow, like her lungs had given up mid-breath. She never looked back as she left the room. But I followed her outside. Not close, just far enough for her to see me when I chose. She turned, stopped. "Emily," I smiled. "Just a little, I guess I'm not a guest anymore." She opened her mouth, but no sound came. I stepped into the building, past her, past the woman who erased me, and into the house that now belonged to me. Not through mercy, not through luck, but through silence. And planning the kind of revenge that doesn't need to shout. Just a signature and a key. After she left the auction in silence, I waited a few minutes before stepping outside. The rain had stopped, but the air was still heavy, like the world knew something irreversible had just happened. I didn't chase her. I didn't gloat. That wasn't my style. But I did see her pause across the street, her phone in one hand, her other wiping under her eyes. I'd never seen her cry before. And maybe a small part of me should have felt sorry. But I didn't, because I remembered the way she laughed at that dinner party, the way she made me feel like nothing. I went back to Morgan's office and signed the final paperwork. It was done. My house was officially under my name, through Larklight Holdings. For the next week, I let everything settle. No big announcements, no keys in Karen's mailbox. I wanted her to wonder. And then, one afternoon, I knocked on the door. She opened it slowly, eyes red-rimmed, her sweater oversized and wrinkled. "Oh," she said, voice hoarse, "it's you." I held out an envelope. Inside, a 30-day notice to vacate, formal and legal. She stared at it. Her hands trembled. "You're evicting me?" "No," I said calmly. "I'm reclaiming what I've already built." Karen looked at me like she didn't recognize me. Maybe she didn't. The woman standing in front of her now wasn't a guest, wasn't a shadow in the corner. She was the owner. And she had every right to take it back. You'd think holding the deed would be enough. That revenge would taste sweet the moment the ink dried. That owning the house, the one I'd scrubbed, repaired, painted, and cried in, would bring peace. But revenge, I learned, is quieter than that. It's not a grand explosion, it's the echo afterward. 30 days, that's what I gave her. 30 days to pack up the same room she once claimed belonged only to her. 30 days to walk through the hallways and feel the walls judging her for what she'd done. I didn't rush the process, I didn't even show up. But every time I looked at the key in my hand, I felt something new. Power. Not the kind that screams or throws punches, but the kind that plans, waits, strikes in silence. Karen didn't fight me, not directly. She tried to appeal, of course, claimed it was her primary residence, pleaded with the court for a delay. Her lawyer submitted a motion something about unfair surprise. But paperwork doesn't care about feelings, and I had Morgan. Every document was pristine, every timeline flawless. The judge gave her 2 extra weeks. That was it. 44 days. She used every one of them. On day 43, I drove by the house. The porch light was off, her car gone. A for rent sign dangled crookedly on the lawn, half blown over by the wind. But the house still stood. It looked the same, and yet it didn't. Because this time, I wasn't pulling weeds or painting trim. I was unlocking the front door as the owner. The silence inside was different, not cold, just waiting. I walked room to room like I was meeting an old friend who'd forgotten my face. The kitchen still had the scar on the countertop from the night I spilled boiling water. The back door still stuck if you didn't lift it slightly. Memories clung to every surface, but Karen had taken almost everything with her. Her furniture, her art, even the curtains. What she left behind were the bones, and I knew exactly how to rebuild. I spent the next 3 weeks transforming it. Not just renovating, reclaiming. I painted the walls in warm terracotta, ripped up the carpet in the guest room and installed hardwood, turned the back den, once her office, into a bright, airy studio. My studio, where I could design, work, breathe. I replaced the curtains with linen, hung frame prints of my own interior projects. Brought in plants, too many. Probably, but they made the space feel alive. The guest room, I turned it into a reading nook. An ironic choice, maybe, but it was never going to be someone else's space again. For the first time in years, I stopped holding my breath in my own home. But Karen wasn't done. 2 months after she moved out, I received a letter. Handwritten, not from a lawyer, just her. It was bitter, blaming, said I had manipulated the system and stolen her legacy. She reminded me she had let me stay out of pity, claimed I'd never have survived without her help. I read it twice, then set it on fire in the kitchen sink, let the ashes swirl into the pipes she once refused to fix. I thought that would be the last of it, until I saw her at the grocery store, of all places. She looked thinner, more tired. No, James. I was in the produce aisle inspecting avocados when she turned the corner. Our eyes met, and for one long second, neither of us moved. Then she forced a smile. "Still living in my house," she said. I didn't flinch. "No," I said, "I live in my house." She looked like she might argue, but instead, she looked away. "I should have never let you in," she muttered, and walked off. I watched her go, but I didn't follow, because I didn't need her apology, didn't want her approval. I had already won not just the house, but the space, the freedom, the silence. Later that evening, I stood in the doorway of my studio. Sunlight spilled across the oak floor. Millie, her old dog, now mine, snored softly by the window. I brewed tea, sat down, and opened my sketchbook. I drew for hours. Plans for a new project, maybe a client, maybe something personal. The house was quiet, but not empty. It was mine, in every corner, every creak. Every breath. I wasn't a guest anymore, and I never would be again. The next morning, I got up early. Not because I had to, but because I wanted to. For the first time in years, I didn't dread walking into the kitchen. I didn't lower my voice. I didn't move around like I had to apologize for existing. This house was finally mine, and it felt it. I brewed fresh coffee, barefoot on the hardwood floors I chose, and opened the back doors wide to let the air in. There were small joys, now unexpected ones, like hearing the wind chimes I'd hung on the porch, or watching sunlight flicker through the new blinds I installed with my own hands. I started journaling again, something I hadn't done since I moved in with Karen. It had always felt unsafe, like any evidence of my inner world could be used against me. Now I wrote everything, every plan, every dream, every moment I had once suppressed to keep the peace. I wrote about the people I'd stopped calling because Karen didn't like them. I wrote about how I'd stopped laughing loudly because James once called it disruptive. I wrote about the version of myself I buried to survive in a house that never wanted to claim me, and then I began to unbury her. Bit by bit, room by room, I hosted my first dinner. Just 4 friends, homemade pasta, laughter echoing off the walls that once held tension like insulation. No one asked if I was just staying for a while. No one looked at me like I didn't belong. They knew, because I did. Every decision I made now came from a place of ownership. I painted a mural in the hallway, replaced the ugly brass doorknobs, hung Polaroids on the fridge, finally allowing myself to live messily, because this was no longer a stage I was pretending on. This was mine. I took a walk around the neighborhood one evening and passed the little cafe where Karen and I used to get Sunday brunch. The server outside recognized me. "Hey, haven't seen you in a while. You used to live on Alder, right?" I paused, then smiled. "I still do." That night, I added one more thing to my journal. A title. "The House That Forgot My Name Until I Wrote It on the Deed." And underneath it, "I am not a guest. I am the author of every wall, every key, every inch. This is not revenge. This is reclamation. And no one can take it from me again." Part 4, Not a Guest, The Woman on the Deed. It started with a knock, soft, hesitant. I had just returned from a client consultation, my arms full of fabric samples, when I heard it 3 short taps at the front door. Millie barked, then backed away like she knew who was standing outside. I opened the door slowly, and there she was. Karen, standing on my porch, hair pulled back too tightly, eyes rimmed with shadows, a smile that tried and failed to hide her uncertainty. She held a box. "Can I come in?" she asked. I stared at her. It had been months since she walked out of this house, months since I had breathed freely inside these walls. Now she was back, not with lawyers, not with demands, just a box. I stepped aside. She entered cautiously, as though the house might remember everything she'd said and throw her out on its own. Her eyes scanned the living room, the new furniture, the plants, the soft light spilling across the wood floors. "You changed it," she murmured. I nodded. She didn't sit. She placed the box on the entry table and stepped back. "I found some things of yours," she said. "Photos, notes, stuff I must have packed by mistake." I opened the lid. There were postcards from college, a pair of earrings I'd thought I'd lost, a letter my dad had written before he passed. Memories. Pieces of the me I used to be. "Why bring these now?" I asked. Karen hesitated, then said, "Because I finally realized something." I didn't reply. She pressed on. "When you lived here, I always felt like the house wasn't mine anymore, like you filled it in ways I couldn't." I raised an eyebrow. "Then why call me a guest?" Her lips parted, then closed. I guess I thought if I said it out loud, it would make it true, that if I reminded you it was mine, I could believe it too. There it was. The truth? Not pretty, not poetic, just human. I didn't say anything for a moment, just let the silence sit. Then I asked, "Do you want something from me, Karen?" She blinked. "No, I don't. Not money, not the house." She looked down. "I just wanted to say, I see it now, what I did. How small I made you feel in a place you helped build. It should have felt satisfying. But it didn't, because it wasn't about her anymore. It was never really about her. It was about me, choosing myself, reclaiming space." I walked her to the door. She lingered. "I hope you're happy here," she said. I nodded. "I am," and I meant it. After she left, I stood at the window and watched her drive away. The car, the same one she once refused to let me borrow, disappeared down the street like a chapter closing on its final paragraph. I turned back to the house. The air felt still, but warm. There were no ghosts here, only foundations. And I was the architect now. Later that week, I received a call. A new client. She'd seen my redesign work on a blog, one of those home inspiration sites that featured before and afters. She wanted help turning her grandmother's old cottage into something new. I smiled, accepted the job. The next day, I returned to the studio, my studio, and pulled out a fresh roll of tracing paper. Millie curled beside my feet as I sketched. I lost track of time. The sun dipped, the house dimmed, but I kept going. Because when you finally own the space you were once pushed out of, every line becomes a celebration. Every curve a declaration. I was not a guest. Not anymore. I was the woman on the deed, the designer of her own fate, and for the first time in my life, I had nothing left to prove. That night, as the house quieted and Millie settled near the window, I wandered through the rooms again. I touched every doorknob, every light switch, every corner of the home that once made me feel invisible. I thought about all the nights I stayed up wondering if I was overstaying my welcome. All the times I held my breath when I heard footsteps in the hall, afraid I'd somehow done something wrong again. And now I breathed freely. The house felt lighter, not because it had been renovated, but because it had been reclaimed by someone who saw its worth not as property but as possibility. I remembered when I first stepped into this place, grief still fresh, future uncertain. I hadn't just needed shelter, I needed identity. Karen couldn't give me that, and when I started carving space for myself, it frightened her, because she only knew how to control, to diminish. But I had grown quietly, like ivy along a fence. I had studied her systems, learned the cracks in her foundation. And when the moment came, I didn't knock them down with rage. I simply stepped through the door she never thought I'd find. People say revenge is sweet, but this wasn't sugar. This was salt, earned, purifying. The kind of justice that doesn't gloat. It just exists. In contracts signed, in silence held, in names engraved on deeds. I lit a candle in the living room, not for mood, for ritual, because this house was no longer just a backdrop to someone else's story. It was my stage now, and I was both playwright and protagonist. I walked to the bookshelf and pulled out a folder plans for a community redesign project I'd been dreaming of since before the fallout. A space for women who had been pushed out, displaced, dismissed. I had the skills, the story, the strength, and now I had the foundation. I made a promise that night when I whispered to the house itself, no one would ever feel like a guest here again. Not under my roof, not on my watch. Because this wasn't just a house, it was a statement, and I was ready to make it loud. The invitation came in the mail. Cream-colored envelope, gold foil trim, my name written in cursive I didn't recognize. I opened it slowly, fingers already tightening around the flap. You are cordially invited to the engagement party of Karen Blake and Gregory James. My breath caught. James. She was marrying him. The man who once laughed when I offered to split utilities. The man who called me the housemaid with an attitude. Curiosity burned hotter than anger. I flipped the card over. The location, a rental venue in the Pearl District. Modern, polished, not a single ounce of soul. I almost tossed it. Almost, but something stopped me. Not revenge, not spite, just closure. The kind that lets you walk into a room and be untouchable. The night of the party, I wore black. Not out of mourning, out of elegance, confidence, armor. The valet took my keys. The hostess smiled as she checked my name off the list. Inside, the room was awash with white flowers, floating candles, overpriced champagne, all surface, no substance. Karen saw me first. Her smile faltered. James turned, and for a moment, just a flicker, his eyes widened. I nodded politely, made my way to the bar. I didn't linger near them, didn't stir drama. But word traveled. She's the one who bought the house. Didn't she used to live with Karen? I heard she flipped the whole thing and made 6 figures. Let them whisper. I sipped my drink, watched the band. Let the tension do what it does best, unravel. An hour in, Karen approached. She didn't say hello, just stood beside me, glass in hand, eyes fixed on the floor. You came, she said. I was invited. Not by me. Doesn't matter. She paused, then whispered, why did you really come? I turned to her, met her eyes, because I wanted to remember how it feels. To walk into a room you thought I didn't belong in and know I own more than just the walls now. Karen didn't answer. She didn't have to. I left before dessert. Not because I felt out of place, but because I'd already taken everything I needed. A week later, I listed the house. 3 years of ownership, 1 year of living, and now it was time to let it go. Not out of pain, out of power. I had outgrown it. I wasn't the woman who walked into that house looking for shelter anymore. I was the woman who walked out owning it. The sale closed above asking. I took the profits and bought a studio space in downtown Portland. Open windows, exposed brick, a corner office with my name on the glass. Emily Dawson Interiors. I hired 2 interns, launched a mentorship program. Women who had been told they were just guests in someone else's life. They came to me. We built together, painted together, redesigned the rooms they had once been forced to shrink inside. And one day, I opened a letter. This time, it wasn't an invitation. It was a testimonial. From a young woman named Sophia. She had escaped a controlling partner, found herself sleeping in a friend's hallway. Now she had her own studio apartment, her first and I had helped her design it. The last line of her letter. You made me feel like I wasn't just passing through anymore, I cried. Not because I was sad, but because I finally understood. This revenge, it was never about taking back space. It was about making space for others, for myself, forever. And when I closed the door to my new office that night, I didn't hear echoes. I heard arrival. I was home, always had been. I just needed to reclaim it. After I sold the house, I returned one last time before handing over the keys. The new owners were a young couple, kind eyes, excited voices, the kind of people who would fill the place with music and slow dances in the kitchen. I walked through every room slowly. The corners still remembered me. The light still bent at that perfect angle in the mornings. But this time it didn't feel like a loss. It felt like a handoff, like I had taken something broken, made it whole, and now it was ready for someone else. Before I left, I slipped a note in the kitchen drawer. A single sentence. This house taught someone how to stand tall again. Maybe it will teach you too. I never signed it, didn't need to, because that chapter didn't belong to me anymore. I had written it, and I had closed it. My work in the new studio flourished. Clients came not just for design, but for the energy. You make the space feel like it has a spine, one woman told me, like it knows who it belongs to. I smiled every time, because I knew exactly what that meant. In time, I gave talks, community centers, college campuses, not about design, but about ownership, about boundaries, about rebuilding from the ashes of silence. One evening, after a lecture, a girl came up to me, maybe 20, shy. She said, "You told my story, but I didn't know anyone else had lived it." I handed her my card, told her she wasn't alone. And neither was I. Sometimes I still dream of that dinner party. But in the dream, I don't sit there in silence. I rise, I take my plate, and I leave, mid-sentence, mid-laugh, because I don't need to wait for permission anymore. I wake up calm, not victorious, free, and that's better. People often ask if I miss the house. I don't, because I never lost it. I absorbed it, turned its walls into words, its echoes into action, its silence into strength. I was never just a guest. I was the woman who learned how to walk through locked doors and build new ones behind her.